Death Note, a young man named Light Yagami finds a dark-covered notebook with the title, Death Note, and decides to take it home. The boy finds a set of rules on the first pages, with the first of them being, the human whose name is written in this notebook will die. As he reads the rules, Light thinks this must all be some sort of random madness. But as he is the son of a detective and has always dreamed of ridding the world of evil people, he decides to write the name of a criminal he saw on the news, a man who was convicted of taking the life of a student. After writing the criminal's name in the Death Note, Light goes to bed without much expectation that it will work and even thinking he's a little silly. But when reading the newspaper the next morning, he comes across the news that the criminal was found dead in the middle of the night, the victim of a heart attack. Even though it's very strange, Light suspects it was a simple coincidence and goes to college. But on the way back, the young man finds those same men who almost stabbed him in the bar, and knowing that now they won't miss the opportunity, Light decides to take the final test and writes the name of one of them in the notebook, causing another heart attack inexplicably, this time right before his eyes. But why a heart attack? It turns out that one of the rules of the Death Note says that if the holder of the notebook does not specify a reason for death, the victim will suffer a heart attack. But along the way, he has a terrifying encounter with Ryuk, the Shinigami who owns the notebook. 4 months after finding that deadly weapon, Light is cleaning up the world by becoming known on the internet as Kira. But unsurprisingly, it wasn't long before the entire police world suspected that there really was someone behind these hundreds of heart attacks and started hunting him, including his own father, the head of the Japanese task force Soichiro Yagami. After several months of trying to solve the problem with his men, L communicates with the police through his computer and shows them the graphs of the crimes committed by Kira, indicating those cases of heart attack that were not something natural and that were most likely carried out by a single person. After meeting with the commissioner, L goes on a worldwide broadcast to speak directly to Kira, taunting him to the point where Light loses his temper and writes his name in his Death Note, causing the detective live in front of him to have a heart attack with billions of viewers, but it was all a trap. As soon as the would-be detective loses his life, the real L emerges without showing his face and begins speaking in a modified voice, revealing that the one who suffered the heart attack was actually Lind L. Taylor, a criminal sentenced to death who was just impersonating him. L asks Kira to take his life, but by staying alive, the detective concludes that the villain can only take the lives of people he knows the full name and face. Shortly after confirming his first suspicion, L reveals that transmission was actually restricted to the city of Tokyo, so now he knows where to look for Kira. After so many advances in a single day, L asks the police to assemble a graph with the times of the deaths, and with that, he can see a pattern. The crimes always happen during breaks between classes and on weekends, meaning Kira is most likely a college student. Light asks his father to join the investigation team with the intention of manipulating things and trying to exonerate himself. But Detective Yagami denies, saying that despite being extremely intelligent, this case is too dangerous for a university student to participate in. Light manages to get into the police database, and upon discovering that the police already know that Kira is a college student, he decides to eliminate 24 criminals in one day, one for every hour, in order to show the police officers that he can manipulate their eliminations as he sees fit. But this was not a very smart decision, as now L knows that his target has access to the police files, that is, Kira is someone close to some of the officers who are participating in the investigation, leaving the number of suspects smaller and smaller. With this new information, L asks some FBI agents to follow the relatives of everyone on the team, including Light himself, but the young man quickly realizes that someone is after him and begins to think of a way to find out his name and thus eliminate him. When rereading the rules, Light sees the paragraph that talks about the cause of death and decides to do some tests with prisoners to find out how much he can manipulate people, thus discovering that it is even possible to force his targets to write things and do stupid action, like trying to break out of prison. With this new discovery and knowing that anyone who touches the Death Note can see the Shinigami, Light decides to put his plan into action. At dawn, the young man decides to take the bus to college along with his girlfriend Shiori, and as soon as they get into the vehicle, the agent who is following him also gets in to sit behind them. Then he is confronted by Light wanting to know why they are being followed, but the agent pretends not to know. As soon as the bus stops at the next stop, a thief enters the vehicle and surrenders the driver, initiating a robbery. Upon seeing the man, Light writes on a piece of paper that as soon as the criminal approaches, he will try to immobilize him, and shows the message to the policeman. As this can be dangerous, the agent approaches and shows his badge, introducing himself as Ray Penber, an FBI special agent. He then says that he will use his training to protect them, but Light ends up dropping the piece of paper by accident and the criminal ends up seeing the message. The bandit then puts the gun to Light's head and asks what he will do now, but as soon as he finishes talking, he sees Ryuk at the corner and is startled by his devilish appearance. Desperate, the man starts shooting at the Shinigami, but when he realizes that his shots do not cause him any injury, the criminal orders the driver to stop the bus and starts running outside, but is run over when he is crossing the street. Turns out this was all part of Light's plan. By writing the bandit's name in the death note, he manipulated the cause of death so that the criminal hijacked that bus. Light then entered the vehicle a point early for Ray Penberg to follow and took advantage of the situation to find out the agent's name. Lastly, that paper he wrote the message on was actually a piece of the death note that he dropped on the floor on purpose, so that as soon as the criminal touched the piece of notebook he could see the Shinigami. In the end, all he had to do was write in the death note that the thief would run out of the bus and be run over right away, and so it happened. Now Light knows his pursuer's name and face and can write it in the death note, but he knows that if he did that he would practically be confessing that he was Kira to L. Since he is being followed, he assumes that other agents are following the other office's relatives, and that if he wants to finish off Ray, he will have to eliminate all the agents at once. To do so, Light starts following Ray until he finds him in the subway and puts his plan into action. He leaves an envelope where he's able to find it, and when the agent opens it, he finds a radio communicator and some sheets of paper. As soon as Ray puts on the communicator, Light in the next car causes a criminal on the subway to have a heart attack to prove that he really is Kira. Continuing with his plan, Light asks Ray how many FBI agents are on the mission and forces the man to write the names of his 11 colleagues, in addition to the team leader, on some sheets that are in the envelope. After writing the names and putting in the envelope, the special agent sees Ryuk outside the subway. That paper where he wrote the names were the death note pages. It turns out that even if you don't own the notebook, if someone writes a person's name on the paper, the death note will work normally. Unaware that he has just taken the lives of his colleagues, Ray obeys Kira's orders and leaves the subway at the next station, but ends up losing his life a few seconds later, victim of a heart attack right in front of his fiancée who was following him. After these deaths, dozens of police members of Soichiro's team dropped out of the investigation fearing for their lives. Now with the team downsized, L decides to stay closer to the group and finally reveals his appearance to the other detectives, as well as asking them to call him by the alias Ryuzaki as a security measure. Continuing his investigation even after this defeat, L is watching the station's security camera tapes when he notices Ray pointing into the car in its final moments. With that, he is completely sure that Kira is one of the people being investigated by Ray, that is, someone from the commissioner's family or Detective Yugami. At the same time, Naomi, Ray's fiancée, who is also a detective, starts an investigation into her husband's death on her own and decides to go to the hijacked bus company to find out what happened that day, thus managing to discover that Ray was following Light. With this information, Naomi goes to the student claiming to be Ray Penberg's fiancé and starts accusing him of being Kira, hitting the whole strategy he's outlined so far. Light decides to plan a strategy in case he becomes unable to write and begins to schedule the deaths to take place in the next few days. But this idea turns out to be useful in another way. Knowing that Kira is most likely one of the Yugami family members, L installs security cameras all over the house, especially in Light's bedroom, who is currently the main suspect. As soon as he gets home, Light quickly notices that someone has been in his room and begins to suspect that security cameras have been placed around the room, meaning he has to be more careful now than ever. As the days go by, the deaths that Light wrote about in advance begin to happen, but L is still not convinced of the boy's innocence and says he can only dismiss him as a suspect after a recent criminal is eliminated. As the days go by, Light knows that he is getting higher and higher in the suspect rankings and that he needs to act soon. After dinner on the 7th day, Light takes a packet of chips to eat in his room to spend the night studying. While he's in the room doing his chores, a last-minute report starts on television. A man suspected of kidnapping a girl was arrested after the victim's body was found in his home. Upon seeing the news, Elle and Detective Yugami begin to go through the cameras watching Light's family, but none of them are watching the report and they don't take any suspicious action. Suddenly, the news is interrupted by a reporter who announces that the criminal who has just been arrested suffered a heart attack in the middle of the interrogation, and with that, Elle is forced to remove the cameras as Light has proven himself innocent. But that was also part of the plan. After taking the packet of chips, Light somehow managed to get a small TV and a piece of the death note inside the package, so when the news of the crime aired he used his left hand to write the criminal's name so the cameras couldn't see him. After another defeat, Elle receives a call from Naomi saying that she will prove that Light is Kira risking her own life and asks the detective to observe the security cameras of the art gallery. A few minutes after the request, Naomi captures Shiori and forces her to call Light to ask him on a date. Upon arriving at the place, Light finds Shiori being taken hostage and is confronted by Naomi, who tries to convince him to confess that he is Kira. But the boy incessantly denies it. As a last-ditch attempt to get him to reveal his true identity, Naomi reveals her real name and tells Kira to eliminate her if he wants to save Shiori. At that moment, the police begin to approach the place, and taking advantage of the fact that Naomi was distracted by the sound of the siren, Shiori breaks free and starts running towards Light. Trying to prevent her hostage from escaping, Naomi shoots Shiori, who loses her life in Light's arms. Feeling guilty for eliminating an innocent person, Naomi immediately regrets it and takes her own life with a shot to the head. One more person failed to capture Kira. It turns out that when Naomi went to confront Light for the first time, she ended up revealing herself to be Rei's fiancé. Light then began to investigate, and by going to talk to the priest who would perform the wedding, he managed to find out Naomi's real name. He used the death note to force her to lure Kira into the gallery and call El to ask him to watch the security camera. Finally, it was enough for Light to write that when the hostage tried to escape, Naomi would shoot her a few shots and take her own life, regretting her crime. In Shiori's case, Light also scripted her death in the death note. He wrote that the young woman would be kidnapped and taken to the gallery to wait for her boyfriend. Finally, it was enough for the boy to write that she would be shot in the back when she tried to flee into her boyfriend's arms. All of this was Light Yagami's plan for Naomi to eliminate Shiori in front of him, and thus, he was able to use this fact as an argument to join the investigation and capture Kira. With his plan completed, Light meets with his father and asks to be placed on the search party, but El himself emerges from the shadows and invites him to use his intelligence to help with the investigation. On the other side of Tokyo, a famous presenter named Misa Amane ends the recording of her show and prepares to go home. Along the way, she begins to be pursued by a maniac who is totally obsessed with her and wants them both to go to the afterlife together. However, when he finally manages to corner her, the lunatic suddenly begins to suffer a heart attack, falling to the ground lifeless next to the death note. The girl touches the notebook and sees Shinigami Rem, owner of this death note.